Hey everyone, welcome to another sidebar episode with Mike. As you can probably guess, it's going to be another ranking of a artist discography. But this time I'm going to change it up a little bit because with the previous three that I've done pretty famous artists. Metallica, Slayer, and Sade are pretty famous. They're pretty well known. Even if you don't like them, you probably know their name or have heard their music somewhere. Today I'm doing at least for the popular culture, a pretty obscure artist, not well known, not super popular, etc. Even though I really think they should be. And this band is one of my favorites. In fact, they're the band I've seen the most live. I believe I've seen them, if I'm not mistaken, 5 times live at this point. Which for some people they've seen their favorite artists like 100 times live. What can you do? I've only seen them 5 times live. But the band in question is the Contortionist. If you know me pretty well, and in fact, if you know Cody pretty well, we're both pretty big fans of this band. Um, which is also to say, once again, that they're not super popular. It's not a name you've probably heard of before. You've probably never heard any of their songs unless you're like a fan of this band. But what's interesting about this band is that, excuse me, I've seen them from their inception all the way to now. The first time I saw the Contortionist was in 2011, and they were touring their Exoplanet album, their first album. They were actually the opening act of that uh, concert. I believe it was the Contortionist followed by the Human Abstract, and then Periphery was the headliner. Which even back then, Periphery wasn't super popular either. So it was a cool concert though. And the last time I saw Contortionist was the Exoplanet Contortionist tour, in which they were not only the headliner, but they basically had 2 sets in the concert. So I've seen them all the way from opening act to headlining act. Again, they're not playing stadiums or anything like that, but I have seen them grow as an artist, which I think is pretty cool because a band like Metallica and Slayer, I was born after they started and really missed their, much of their career until I became a fan later in their careers. Beside the point. So what I'm going to do here is what I've done for all the sidebar episodes I've done so far, which is not only rank my personal ranking of the discography, but also showing off my vinyl collection of Contortionists because I am lucky enough to own pretty much every one of their releases on vinyl. I'm not sure if I'm missing any, and that goes for supplementary material that is not their main studio records. So I want to get those couple things out of the way. Contortionist only has 4 studio albums at the moment. We've been waiting for a 5th one for like 6 years at this point. I would wish they would release, a new album, but apparently there's a new album in the works. It's been in the works for like 5 years, so who knows? But beside the point. I do own I believe I own all their vinyl products on vinyl, if you know what I mean. Everything they've released. And that includes, shout out to Cody, the live retrospective from Atlanta box set. Now this is a box set. It's big. It's got 3 vinyl discs in it. I'm not going to open it and like show every single one. I do have this thing though. This thing is amazing. It is on streaming platforms. For when I first ordered this thing, it was exclusive to vinyl, and I thought it was going to be exclusive to vinyl. I'm not upset or anything, but it's cool to have this on vinyl. This was during COVID when the lockdown was occurring. They did 3 live streamed concert, basically. No audience, no people in there other than the band. And they did 3 sets. The first set was just a general concert, like greatest hits thing, a lot of their big hits from across their whole discography. The second set was the entirety of Clairvoyant, playing it from front to back. And then the third set, which, if you have not heard the third set, you have to hear it. It's an Intrinsic and Exoplanet set, and it is so good. So good. I'll get to how I feel about those albums in a second, but this alone was worth it. This is probably like $100 and something. It's a rare box set. I think there's only like a couple thousand of these in existence. The vinyl version, obviously, again, you can listen to these things on streaming, but with the box set here, that third set of Exoplanet and Intrinsic songs is so good, and it gave me actually a newfound respect for Intrinsic, the album. Because for the longest time, I didn't really care for Intrinsic, but now I like it a lot. I really love it. And that's the thing to say about all these Contortionist releases. I love everything they've ever released. Now, admittedly, that's only like 4 studio albums, 1 EP in this box set. So like, it's not a huge work of discography here, but still, I do love all their stuff. And that does include the Our Bones EP, which again, extended play. It's not super long. It's like 15, 18 minutes in length, but really killer tracks on here. And I wish that this was the primer for the new release, but I'm pretty sure this thing dropped in like 2020, 2019, somewhere around there. It was a couple years ago at this point. The hope was it was going to follow up very quickly with an album, but that obviously never happened. And the thing I love about the Contortionist too, again, this is not going to play for audio, but they love just making interesting vinyl. So this is a very, very hot pink vinyl. Move it over here so you can see it better. I like that. I hate when vinyl's just stark black. I know that at a point in people's careers, they only had stark black, but like, do something interesting in your vinyl. And Contortionist decides to do it. Follow and Early Grave are great Contortionist songs, great modern Contortionist songs. All Gray is gorgeous. It's a beautiful track. It's only like 2 minutes in length, but it is so pretty and so beautiful, especially when you counterplay it with what the Contortionists used to do a lot of, which is aggression, growling, very heavy. All Gray is none of that. It's just Mike Lessard being or showcasing off that voice he has. And then a cover of 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins, which at sometimes I like this cover more than the actual song. You know, Billy Corgan, his voice, Corgan, whatever, his voice is either love or hate. And sometimes, I don't know, Billy's voice just ain't it. Mike Lessard's voice, though, is it all the time. It's always good. It's a great EP. I think it's really wonderful. I wish, again, that this would be the primer for something bigger and not necessarily better, but just like, where's the new album, you know? But I'm not going to count it in the discography because it's an EP. It's not a long play. So now I actually get to the full discography, which again is only 4 albums. So it's not like this is going to be a long-winded conversation. And if you would have asked me months ago, I would have had the first 2 albums I'm about to talk about in a separate order, in a different order. But man, after listening to Retrospective live in Atlanta and listening to that third set with the Intrinsic stuff and the Exoplanet stuff, I don't really know if I hold that opinion any longer. So my current opinion could totally change, could totally be different. But at the moment, at the current time, my least favorite Contortionist album is their most recent, Clairvoyant. And with that being said, I still think this thing is great. My major complaint with it is that I wish it had more aggression. What I mean by that is that if you listen to this album, aggressive vocals are just not on it really anywhere. I think there's one moment in the song Clairvoyant, if I'm not mistaken, where Mike sort of approaches, is it Clairvoyant? I don't even remember. He approaches aggressive vocals, but then he quickly goes back to his singing voice, which is, again, is beautiful. Mike Lessard is a killer vocalist. I just wish they would do more aggression on this album. They just don't. But that's not to say that this album isn't great. I think there's a lot of great tracks on here. Reimagined is amazing. Clairvoyant, the song, I love the opening riff to that thing. Relapse and then Return to Earth. Return to Earth might be their biggest single ever at this point. Not to say that they've had huge single success or anything, but like as far as singles are concerned, that might be the biggest one on YouTube. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's the case. Also, really, really love the vinyl coloring on this. Just unique. It's cool. It's different. Yes, it's kind of black, but it's also this like gray slip pattern. Really awesome. Really love it when it's on the turntable. It just like kind of looks hypnotic. It's a great record. It's a very personal record for Mike Lessard, I believe, because I think it's about one of his friends who passed away. Again, I could be totally wrong. This isn't one of my favorites, but it's still great. I still love this thing. I'll throw it on anytime and play the whole thing. There's not a skippable song on here. I love it. It's great. But someone had to be at the bottom. This next record, normally for years upon years, was at the bottom for me. But man, after listening to that retrospective set 3, Intrinsic really grew on me quickly. And that's because there's certain songs on here when they performed them live, I'm like, it was just like discovering those songs for the first time again. Case in point, if you have not heard the third set version of Geometric Confusion, oh my God, it's so good. And Geometric Confusion just as a song is just so good. I'm not sure where my headspace was for years upon years, where the only song I really knew from this album for years was Hollow Movement, the first song, because that's the only memorable one I had. And then like for the rest of this track list, I was just kind of like, yeah, it's just whatever. It's not interesting. It's not engaging. again, I don't know what I was on, because rediscovering this thing has been amazing. There's so many good songs on here. I mean, Sequential Vision, Causality, Feedback Loop, again, Geometric Confusion, which might be my favorite song in the whole thing. Cortical Solipsis, just so good, so good. And it's that point before Mike Lesser joined the band that you have. Oh, I'm blanking on the guy's name right now. Just kind of, I'm just gonna be blunt. I think Mike Lessard is the better vocalist of the two. In fact, the first guy, not that he's not great. I'll get to one of the albums he's on in a bit, but not nearly as memorable as Mike Lessard, in my opinion. And so when Mike Lessard does these songs, I actually think in some ways he does them better, especially in the case of Intrinsic. Exoplanet's a different story, but I'll get to that in a minute. And again, as usual, they're doing really cool things with their vinyl. Sort of this like pinwheel pattern of purples and blue splotches. Is it the, it's kind of odd, but it's also cooler than just stark black vinyl. So I found a new respect for this thing. I love this thing. Is it my favorite? No. Even in discovering it again, it's not necessarily my favorite, but it is number 3 of 4. I still value it greatly. I still think it's great. I'm now at a point where I could throw on the whole thing and love the whole thing, whereas years and years and years went by where I was like, I could take like 1 or 2 tracks off this thing and leave the rest. Again, don't come after me. I have no idea what I was thinking. So we're already at the top 2 because there's only 4. And these top 2 were it's a struggle because both of these albums I think are perfection. I wouldn't change a thing about them. It's just a matter of one does more for me. But again, for years and years, Language was actually my number 1 pick for Contortionist. This is the album that really got me into them. I mean, when this thing came out and I heard Language 1 and 2 for the first time, it was kind of like rediscovering the Contortionist, because you hear songs off Exoplanet Intrinsic and they're great. But for years, I was kind of just like lulled into this view of like Contortionists are just this opening band who, I'll go to a concert to see Periphery or Between the Buried and Me, and maybe Contortionist is on the bill. And that's why I've seen them 5 times, because I went to see other bands and Contortionist just happened to also be playing as part of the set list. But then Language came out. And this totally flipped my perspective on Contortionist. When this thing came out and I heard this thing for the first time, I was like, Contortionists are a headlining band now. This is unreal. And on top of it, this is the first album with Mike Lessard, the vocalist. And God, dude, what a powerful opening impression you get. Now, the Source as the interlude intro, it's cool, it's good, it sets the tone for sure. But then Language 1 and 2 comes in. And if you're a Contortionist fan, I don't need to say much. If you're not a Contortionist fan, if there's one song from the band I would recommend listening to, it's definitely Language 1. I would go ahead and throw 2 in there as well, but 1 for sure. I mean, I've played it for my parents, my fiance, and all of them have said that, like, wow, this is actually pretty good. I like this. Even though it's kind of aggressive, even though harsh vocals come in, it's just so beautifully written. It's so atmospheric. It is so much larger than itself. It's so good. You get Integration, Thrive, Primordial Sound. God, what a good song. Ebb and Flow. It's great. It's like every track on here is awesome. Every moment on here is awesome. And on top of it, with at least the vinyl version here, you get the rediscovered songs, the songs that come in on the side 4, where they take songs from this album and then like quote unquote rediscover them and change them up. Sounds like totally different songs, and yet they're the same songs, but also done in such interesting and creative ways. Such a cool way to reinvent the sound of this record. They didn't need to be there, but because they are there, it just makes the record stronger as a whole. I also rarely do this, but a lot of these records are gatefold, which is pretty cool. What I mean is I never really open up the vinyl gatefold, but I just wanted to showcase once again, really like this vinyl. This orange sort of splatter effect. Love it. Do this more often. Contortionists do, so I like that about them. For the longest time, this was my number 1 by the Contortionists. By like leaps and bounds, it was number 1. But then a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. There was this random moment, and I have this friend of mine named Nick Schneider, shout out. He's a Contortionist fan like me. And for years, we would debate what's the greatest Contortionist album. And time again, he would say that Exoplanet is number one. And again, for years, I was like, no way. Have you heard Language? Have you like listened to that record? And he always was adamant that Exoplanet was the best. And I would just, scoff off and shove him off and be like, whatever, dude. And then something happened one day where I was like, you know what? I could really go for just listening to the Contortionist discography because I haven't listened to Exoplanet and Intrinsic in a really long time. And dude, I don't know what Mike was thinking. This fucking thing, I'm going to struggle to find the words of how I truly feel about this. This is perfection. I know Language is also perfection. This is perfection. This is perfection in prog metal. This is one of my favorite records of all time, much less my favorite Contortionist record. This is a top 10 album. Some days it's a top 5 album, like of all time, of all genres, of all artists. This thing is perfection. It's literally God-given gift to humanity. I mean, like I said, though, what's funny is that for years, I just thought this thing was cool and it was good. And, Flourish, the song Flourish off this record, is easily their most popular song among fans, right? So Return to Earth might be their most, like, public big song, but, like, Flourish is the song every Contortionist fan knows. Every Contortionist fan wants to see that song played live. And I did, too. I love Flourish. But every other song on here, for the longest time, I was like, I don't really care about any of it. When I heard the Redux version that came out in like 2016, I think that all completely changed. It all just completely flipped on its head. I mean, my God, you open with Primal Directive. And there is that moment towards the end of this, like the last 30 seconds. It is the heaviest fucking thing ever. It is so goddamn heavy. And when I'm looking for heavy music, that's what I want. Someone might hear the last 30 seconds of Primal Directive and immediately turn it off and say, I don't like it. It's not my thing, but that's fine. Dude, I'll take it every day with like scoops of ice cream. It's so good. And it's one of those things where the second Primal Directive comes on, there is no not listening to the whole record. I'm listening to the whole thing, all of it. Even if I have to take breaks in between, if Primal Directive comes on, I'm listening to all of it. You get Flourish after that. Amazing, amazing track. I mean, what is there to say? Expire, Contact, Advent, and then Vessel. I want to speak of Vessel for a second. There is that moment where they use the robotic voice, where in normal English it says, we will survive by R, but they do this like robotic alteration on it. And, the song is building and building and building to this moment. And then music cuts out. We will survive by R. And then just everyone comes back in. Bro, it's a table flip, break the chairs, put holes in the walls moment. And then on the retrospective third set, when they do this song, and Mike Lesser does the buildup, and then he says, we will survive by R, but he's not doing the robotic thing. He's just doing his normal, dude. It's so good. If you're a fan of like heavy metal, you need to hear the retrospective third set. You also need to hear this record if you've never heard it. It's so good. So good. Then you get Oscillator, classic Contortionist song. Axiom is a very lovely, beautiful guitar interlude. And sometimes I've had this in like a shuffle playlist and Axiom comes on and someone will go, oh my God, what is that? That's beautiful. And then I have to explain to them, it's the Contortionist. It's from this album. And then I play another song from this album. They're like, are you sure it's not even the same artist or something? It is. And what's great about Axiom is that it leads into the Exoplanet suite of Egress, Void, and Light. I know some people say that Contortionist's best epic is Language 1 and 2, and I totally get that. Like, I totally see that. But man, the Exoplanet suite might top it for me. It's so good. And one of my favorite moments on any album, or rather, I should say, one of my favorite closings to any album is the end of Light, where the vocals are, I want to say Mike Lessard, but Mike Lessard wasn't even on this record when it came out. It's talking about the fact that, this exoplanet has failed. We must migrate. This exoplanet has failed. And I'm just saying it, right? I'm just saying it in normal standard English. but you have to hear the vocal approach of how they do it and the instrumentation. And then the fact when they say failed and hold out the failed, and then all the music cuts out. And it's like you hear this signal, this like lights or like this audio signal of like a space station or something out in the distance. And it's just like slowly getting quieter and quieter. Oh my God, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's one of those perfect narrative music things, because the entirety of Exoplanet is a concept, it's a narrative. But man, God, it's like it's moving in spite of the fact of how heavy it is. It sometimes moves me to tears. And you can say that's weird, and you can say I'm whatever for thinking that, but God, dude, like it just does. When great music hits, it hits. And it makes me feel things, and it makes me feel like there's something beyond just the sound. There's something more going on here. It's a perfect record. Like I said, some days it's literally in my top 5 of all time. I adore this thing. This is easily my favorite metal record of the 2010s, because this came out in 2011. And just to point out one last time, the color scheme of this vinyl, very erratic, very different colors, but it also kind of looks like a planet being destroyed. Like, and it, a asteroid hit into it, or the planet just explodes, however that could possibly happen. But that's kind of cool. I kind of think that's pretty cool, especially when you hear the album and the sort of narrative that is going on. It's not about planets exploding per se, but it's also about planets being uninhabitable and how humanity is just going to run itself thin if it cannot find a sustainable source outside of Earth itself. It's beautiful. It's perfect. I can understand people not liking it. This is not a band I would recommend just, wholeheartedly of like, oh, you'll definitely like this if you hear it. No, dude, you won't. At least most of you won't. That's not to say you can't give them a chance, though. Should you start with Exoplanet? Absolutely not. Exoplanet is like you have graduated from clairvoyant language, then you can try Exoplanet and Intrinsic. If you're a fan of metal and haven't heard Contortionist, you can start with Exoplanet, I think. But if you're not into like the whole aggressive metal thing, definitely give Clairvoyant a shot. Clairvoyant is not nearly as aggressive of all their other work, and it's really kind of a hard rock album sometimes. It's not really a metal album at all, but I still love it. You can also give Language a shot. The Our Bones EP is also, there's choices here. It's not like all this stuff is completely unapproachable. It's just to say that their early work is like super exceedingly heavy. But in the case of Exoplanet, I also think it's one of the greatest metal records of the last 10, well, at this point, like 12-ish years. I love this band. I wish they would release their next album like now, as opposed to however long it's going to take. But yeah, just wanted to talk about the Contortionist because I'm lucky enough to have all their vinyl, and I think they're pretty great. And in spite of the fact that I've seen them so many times, they're a group that whenever they're touring, I'm there. I'll go easily 3 hours to see them. Will I go 5 or more, or more than 3? Probably not. I mean, I've seen them 5 times at this point, until they drop a new record or they do like something interesting beyond just the base level. Here's a bunch of news, or not new songs, but like classic hits, a classic concert set list. I'm probably not going to travel more than 3 hours. If it's under 3 hours, absolutely, I'll be there. But the Exoplanet Language tour, I mean, they literally played my 2 favorite albums front to back, and especially Exoplanet. I mean, my God, how could I miss that? I think I drove 3 hours to see that show, and it was completely worth it. I would love to see them again. And what I would really love from Contortionist is them just to release a new album, but I can't control that kind of thing. Until then, I just have to wait. Until then, we just have to wait. And until next time, I hope you have a good day.